So, welcome again, everyone. My name is Edward Tufhorn. I am the executive director for the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation. The foundation is the primary nonprofit partner working with Angel Island State Park to help preserve the historical buildings at this National Historic Landmark, as well as to uplift the histories and stories of the immigrants who were detained or processed on Angel Island, and to connect those histories to the world around us today. We do that all with the intention and the hope of inspiring a future that is more equitable and more inclusive, and that really demonstrates the immense value that immigrants have in making nations better. I am so thrilled and honored to have the opportunity to introduce Curtis Chin, who is this month's Author Spotlight. Curtis is a co-founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop in New York City, where he served as the nonprofit's first executive director. He went on to write for network and cable television before transitioning into social justice documentaries and has screened his films in over 600 venues across 20 countries. He's written for CNN, Bon Appetit, where one of his essays was just selected for Best Food Writing in America 2023, the Detroit Free Press, the Emancipator Boston Globe, the list goes on. He's also a graduate of University of Michigan and has received awards from ABC Disney Television, New York Foundation for the Arts, National Endowment for the Arts, and more. So welcome, Curtis. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And first, let me just say that I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. There was so much of your journey that felt familiar and also parts that felt different and unique. And I hope that tonight's program inspires more people to read your memoir.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's such an honor to be here with your organization. I've been to the immigration station, and the work that you're doing is just incredible. So thank you for inviting me.
Before we get into giving you an opportunity to read a few excerpts from your book, we did have a couple of questions just to help set the stage and the context for your book. And so the first question that we wanted to ask you was if you could tell us a little bit about your family's immigration to the US.
I actually know more of my family's immigration history more from my parents just talking about it. So I haven't done the actual research, although as I was telling you earlier, at one of the events I went to, I think the one up in Seattle, there was a volunteer from the National Archives up there who has since been helping me with my family. But my family's history actually starts in the 1800s on both sides. They ended up somehow in the Midwest. I jokingly say that my great great grandfather went from Canton, China to Canton, Ohio, before realizing there weren't actually Chinese people there, and then moving up to Detroit. And they spent, all that time there because they were merchants. They were able to go back and forth, between the different countries. So.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that bit of context about your family's own journey. And as we think about the opportunities, the stories, the histories that so many of our families have, not everyone has the opportunity or the initiative to put that all to paper. So can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, this really started off as just a personal project because, despite the fact that my family had arrived in Detroit in the late 1800s and we'd had over 100 years there, when my dad sadly passed away in Detroit in a car accident, my family left. My mom, we moved her out to the Bay Area. The rest of my siblings followed, and they're all actually now up in the Bay Area. And when my siblings started having kids, I just thought it was a part of our family's history that I wanted to know about, right? This long history of Asians in the Midwest. And so I really started just jotting down these family stories for them. They were more humorous, those stories, just funny stories of being in the back of a Chinese restaurant. But, recently when COVID happened and George Floyd was murdered and there was this rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, I felt like the book maybe could address those issues too. And so I shifted the tone of the book a little bit to incorporate a little bit more serious reflection, about the times that I was growing up in and maybe how we can learn from that.
Absolutely. And there's so many vignettes within your book where you share events and incidents that happen to you and your family. Some are absolutely very humorous. Some are very candid and very specific about things that you and your family experienced, and definitely appreciated that lens that you offer of being this Chinese Asian American family in the middle of the Midwest that's surrounded in a context and a community where there was a lot of diversity and a lot of rich resources, but also a lot of challenges.
Yeah, I mean,
Given, oh, go ahead, sorry.
sorry.
Just real quickly, given the level of candor that you have in some of these experts, was curious to ask you, how has your family responded or reacted to the book?
I don't know. I know they have the book. I don't know if they've actually read the book. I actually suspect that they haven't, because I've casually asked them, and they're like, "Oh, I haven't got to it yet." I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe maybe they feel like they went through all those stories already, so why do they have to reread them? Or maybe they just think, oh, that's just Curtis's. So yeah, but they're very supportive. Like I have, shameless plug. So I'll be actually in the Bay Area tomorrow. I have a reading in San Francisco during lunchtime for a book club, but then at night I'll be in Campbell, and so my family's going to come out for that. They'll be there at that reading. So.
Sounds like a wonderful opportunity. It'll be interesting to see what their reaction is at that reading.
Well, I did that about a month ago now. I did readings up in San Francisco, Oakland, and they came to all those readings, which was kind of nice. And especially for my mom, because my mom is such a big part of the book and her journey. And so for her, who had always encouraged me to write her story, for me to be able to incorporate that into this book, I think was really one of the best parts of the writing journey.
That's lovely. And there's so many wonderful moments in the book where you do shine a little bit more light about your mother's experiences in Detroit. So with that, I am going to turn the mic fully over to you to give our audience tonight an opportunity to hear a few excerpts from the book. So without further ado, everyone, please welcome Curtis Chin.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to read two excerpts today. The first is a very short passage from the beginning, just so you know what the book is about. So just to give the backdrop, so the book is called Everything I Learned. I learned in a Chinese restaurant, and it really is about growing up in my family's restaurant and in Detroit. And I like to think of it as not just any Chinese restaurant, but the Chinese restaurant, the most popular Chinese restaurant, because it was open for over 60 years. It was the center of Chinatown, and it was just a great place to grow up. The book is divided into three sections of 8 stories each, 8 in elementary, middle school, 8 in high school, and 8 in college. And for people that know Chinese superstition, it's 888. So the prologue really starts talking about my family's journey to the Midwest, because I feel like a lot of times when you read about the history of Chinese Americans or Asian Americans, it's oftentimes based on the West Coast or New York City or Hawaii. You don't really hear too much about what was happening in the middle of the country. And so that's why I wanted the prologue really to establish that, but also because I don't think that you can know a person's journey unless you know the family's history. And so this is how the story begins. Welcome to Chung's. Is this for here to go? Armed with a smile and a red waiter's jacket with a perpetual plum sauce stain. That's how my dad greeted any new face who entered the lobby of our popular Chinese restaurant in Detroit. Interestingly, my great-great-grandpa Gong Li had faced this same journey question in the late 1800s as he stood cold and alone on a rickety dock in Guangzhou, China, trying to decide his future and that of his young impoverished family. For here to go. For here to go, as I got older, it was a question I asked myself. Starting in our restaurant's long and open back kitchen, where my family made some of our most popular items, including the tangiest barbecue pork and best smelling almond cookies, my mom taught me my first lessons. Before diving into math, English, and geography, she began with a little American history, tales of elders and ancestors, our family as prologue. And so basically, that's what the book is about. It's like this struggle that I was going through, as a kid, because on one hand, I loved my family, I loved the restaurant, I loved being there, but the city of Detroit was literally falling apart around me. Not only did you have the struggling auto industry, but you had crack cocaine, you had AIDS. I knew 5 people murdered by the time I was 18 years old. But despite that, we had this really fabulous restaurant that my parents were able to raise me and my five siblings. And so that is the journey of the book. And as I mentioned, it's three sections of 8 stories each. And I'm now going to read I'll jump to the towards the end of the book, um, and read a chapter from there. And so to sort of set up this segment of this chapter, I'm not reading the whole chapter, but just a part of it, is that it was I to set it up, it was the 80s. And, for a lot of gay people, you know, I AIDS was happening, and it was this really dark cloud in our community. And I really thought that I would not live past the age of 30, right? Because everything you saw about gay people was that they'd be dead. But also, growing up in Detroit, again, where I saw so much violence, I really didn't think I had a long lifespan. So the idea of going to college was not something very appealing to me. But my mom, who did not have a chance to go to high school, even to finish high school, and my dad, who had to drop out of high school, college, community college, after 2 semesters to work in the family business. For them, and particularly my mom, she really wanted us to go get an education because she thought that was the best way to get out of the restaurant life. And so I rationalized that, what was giving up 4 years of my life for a woman who's basically given up her whole life for me. And so, I applied to college, with the provision that I would apply to one school, and if I didn't get in, I wouldn't go. And she's like, okay, fine, but the one school you're applying to is Michigan. And said, okay, I'll apply to Michigan. And I got in, and I didn't know what I was going to study there. And I was working full time and taking classes at night. And it just seemed like there were a lot of writing classes that happened at 6 o'clock. It was evening. And so I signed up for a lot of writing classes. And from there, I just really fell in love with the idea of writing. And I signed up for the creative writing program, or I applied to get in, and I did get in. And so this story happens after I got into that writing program. It's between my junior and senior year. Oh, and the chapters are all labeled by like a Chinese menu, so they don't make sense. But this is chapter M7. Being a creative writing major made me the literary expert at Chung's. That was inevitable, as my dad asked every customer, "Have you met our number 3? He's the writer in the family." Every time he mentioned my program, the number of students accepted got smaller and smaller. At some point, I expected him to say I was the only one on campus even allowed to own a pen. One week, one of our waiters was out sick. My younger siblings were busy with their weekend activities, so I was the one called in to help. I jumped at the chance to have some home-cooked meals for a few days. I was running around the dining room, refreshing our customers' silver teapots, when a white middle-aged woman reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a colorful hardcover. "Have you read this book? It's so good." The Joy Luck Club, the recently released novel that featured a bunch of old, sassy Chinese ladies who like to eat, gossip, and play mahjong, could have easily been set in our back kitchen. Every time I came in to help at the restaurant, another diner, usually older and female, cited the most memorable characters, lines, and scenes. They all wanted to know if I was working on something similar. I was writing poetry, but they didn't care. To them, all writers were the same. They would squeal, "You could be the next Amy Tan." My mom turned out to be the biggest pusher. She rarely had a book in her hand, but the success of the Joy Luck Club convinced her that her life was a bestseller too. She followed me around the dining room, dropping stories from her childhood, the same ones I'd heard growing up, but now she recounted them as if she was auditioning for her own books on tape. One night, after seeing how our waiters sometimes pooled tips together, my mom shared an oldie. "When the communists marched south, they targeted my family. My uncles and grandpa were rich in America, so the Red Guard called us traitors. My stubborn grandma didn't want to leave her big home, so when my parents escaped to Hong Kong, they left me behind to keep her company. The communists hated me and my pawpaw. When I was 4, they made me watch as they forced my grandma to climb the old banyan tree in our courtyard. Then they pushed her off into a pile of broken glass." For a visual, my mom rubbed her knees. Another time, standing at the water station, she launched into her own nautical tale. "When I was 5, my uncle in America paid $25,000 in renminbi, a king's ransom in people's money, to a local fisherman to ferry our remaining family out of China. After a long ride tucked under the planks of his fishy fishing boat, we came up for air. But we weren't in Hong Kong. The traitor had turned us into the authorities. In jail, I had to sing Communist Party songs to earn extra rice for me and my grandma." Another chapter came as we stood beneath a painting of the Chinese countryside. "When my pawpaw and I were freed from jail, we found out that the officials had given away our home to peasants. We were forced to live several villages away in a dirt hut with 3 other families. Whenever we went out for a pail of water, My grandma had to bend low to keep her head below the soldiers. Once again, she gave me a demonstration, this time bowing her head. Granted, my mom's epic saga interested me. Who wouldn't be intrigued by tales of prison cells, guns, and stolen ransoms? Even the parts about her mundane life in Hong Kong after she was reunited with her parents and siblings were amusing. But these were her stories, not mine. She had to tell them, not me. I was in school to find my own voice. I sat and listened, but that was as far as it would go. Toward the end of the summer, as I was at the back table sipping my red pop, stockpiling poems for the upcoming semester, my mom sat down. Before I could say anything, she started talking. I was a top student in Hong Kong. When Pepsi came to town, they held a big contest for students to draw a picture of their own school. Mine was the best at Sacred Heart. I won 6 cases. There were so many bottles, I had to give some to the nuns. I threw down my Parker pen, the one I treated myself to after getting into the program. Yes, and they kept burping all day. It was so funny. You've told me that story over and over, and I don't even like Pepsi. I prefer Coke. My mom's shoulders shriveled. The shine faded from her rosy cheeks. You don't want to hear my story? I tensed up. I do, but I'm behind on my own stuff. Between working at Drake's, the Journal, and saving the world, my schedule was packed. On top of that, my workshops in the fall were advanced. Still insecure about my place in the program, I put pressure on myself to create more interesting writing by staying up late and scribbling in my notebook every detail of my life. But no matter how hard I tried, working harder could not produce a better poem. My mom lifted herself off her seat. The glint in her eyes orphaned me. Her 42 years of life flashed before my eyes. She'd gone from Guangzhou to Hong Kong to Detroit and spent the past 2 decades raising her 6 children in a hostile foreign land. She tried to prove her life had worth, that it hadn't gone unnoticed, and here I was, the ungrateful son, writing it off. Her lips quivered in a soft murmur. I hastily picked up my pen, backtracking. Go ahead, I'll write it down this time. My mom bowed her head as if I were one of the soldiers holding a gun to her temple, ordering her to sing. No, you go on. You do your own thing. I reached out my hand, but by then she had disappeared through the black swinging door, leaving only the rattling from the kitchen, the clanging walks, and rumbling dishwasher. I sat there upset at myself for being so inconsiderate. Everything I had done in the past 3 years had been for her, but it seemed as though I had failed the final test. My education wasn't just to help me get a better life, it was for my whole family. We were a team. We were the 8 immortals. How could I let them down? I needed to make things right, but I knew that, like most disappointments in our house, apologies were never spoken. Only deeds would bring about reconciliation. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Curtis, and definitely in sharing that excerpt, there. I think there's much that rings true, right, for a lot of us, or rings familiar for those of us who are of immigrant heritage, knowing the struggles, the sacrifices that our parents make, and at the same time wanting to carve our own pathways forwards and choose our own destinies. We're going to take the opportunity now to open it up to question and answers from questions from the audience and hopefully answers from you. And so if everyone can use the chat box to go ahead and type in your questions, and I'll help to read them out loud. While we're waiting for people to type in their questions, I did want to ask you this question. So I know from personal experience that growing up gay and Asian in the Midwest can be very isolating. And so my question I wanted to ask you tonight was, what do you hope that others who share aspects of these identities might take away from your book?
Um, it's been really a moving experience traveling around because people actually come up to me and they tell me what they get out of the book, right? And so it's been a bit surprising sometimes because you just don't know. You know, I have to say this has happened a few times where it's like at the end of the night after the Q&A, after the book signing, there'll always be this like young Asian American in their teens who will wait till they're the last person or one of the last people, and they'll come up to me and just talk about the struggles that they're going through in their lives, working in their family business and the sacrifices they're making, and oftentimes the fighting that they're having with their parents. And then they break down and they start crying. And it's really hard because I'm not a therapist. I'm not trained to do these things, and all I can do is just hold up my hand and tell them to try to stay positive, try to have a big picture about these things, and also try to be compassionate towards your parents too, because they're probably struggling with a lot of similar issues that you're going through that, you might not think that they're dealing with, but they are at the same time. And so hopefully that has an impact. And I've also been starting to get these emails from people too who, have listened to the audiobook or read the book, oftentimes gay people sharing their stories of coming out. And so, yeah, I guess, I mean, yeah, I guess that's why we write books, right? I mean, the response, these one-on-one connections with people that you just never know. And I'll share one more story, actually from a completely different source. Was that I've actually had a lot of our former customers of our restaurant come up to us to come up to me or come to our readings too. And one time I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and at the end, during the Q&A, one of the people got up and asked, "Hey, is anybody here eating at Chung's?" And nobody had eaten there because it's Massachusetts. But she said, "Oh, she's from Detroit, and her family used to eat there all the time, and those were some of her favorite memories growing up." But then she said that her mom has dementia now. But then when she told her mom that she was going to this reading by one of the kids from Chung's, her mom started recounting all these memories of our restaurant, the food and the decor and, the people there. And she said she felt like she had her mom back for the first time in a long time. And that was also a very nice moment too. And so, yeah, it's these are the unexpected joys of being a writer.
The healing power of food too, right? And speaking of food, I believe that Chung's was known for your egg rolls, and you have a calculation, right, of how many egg rolls the
Yeah.
restaurant had served.
Usually, when I'm in person during I start off the program by asking people to guess how many egg rolls we made. But I didn't do it this time because we're on Zoom. But I guess you guys can guess if you want. For those who haven't read the book, just to show how popular the restaurant was, I usually make people guess how many egg rolls you think we sold in the 60 odd years that we owned the family business. I'll give you guys like 30 seconds to throw in a guess, or 15 seconds. How many egg rolls in 60 years? Any guesses out there? All right.
I would guess, but I've already read the books.
Okay. We sold over 10 million egg rolls, so that just shows you how popular the restaurant was. And so
It's definitely a very popular restaurant. And is it still open?
no, sadly, after my dad passed away, my mom couldn't handle it herself. So I was the one who actually had to go back to Detroit and sell the family business. So yeah, no. We sold it to somebody, they ran it for a few years, and then during COVID it finally shut down. Um, but it was at a different physical location than the one I grew up in. And recently, so the building that I worked in, the one that I grew up in, after we closed that location, it was empty for the last 20 odd years. But again, to show you how popular that restaurant was, is that when the building sold this past year, the owner went through all the trouble of tracking me down in Los Angeles to ask me if I would reopen that business because the legacy of that restaurant is just so incredible, right? And I thought about it for like 5 seconds. I was like, oh, could I do this? But I like, wait, I'm on a book tour, I can't do this. But I think they recently announced that they raised $3 million to renovate the building, and they're in the process of bringing in a new restaurant. So um which is a little bittersweet for me, but I wish them success, whoever ends up being in that space, because it was really a great childhood. So
And clearly from your book, it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to run a restaurant, and to do so for 60 years is really impressive. We do have a question from Nancy, who writes, Curtis, I just finished your audiobook, which was moving, funny, and highly relatable. I was especially tickled to hear Say Up spoken in a recording for the first time. Please connect the dots of how you and Jeff finally became a couple, or do we have to wait until your second memoir?
yeah, you have to wait till the second memoir. Sorry about that. For people who haven't read the book, yeah, Jeff is my current husband, and he makes a quick cameo in the book. So I don't know if that was a spoiler or not.
And if there are additional questions, please feel free to type them into chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I did have one question that was private message to me. And the question is, Curtis, what did you enjoy most about working on this book?
Um, I don't know if this is enjoying, but appreciating was that in the writing of the book, I spoke to my mom like probably at least like 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes longer conversations, sometimes just a quick, 30-second conversation just to confirm a detail and stuff like that. So I appreciated that in the sense of, I got to call my mom and talk to her because sometimes when we grow older, right, we forget to call our parents and we forget to have these connections with them. And I do think that sometimes, my mom, particularly after the accident, you know, um, she's a widow. She doesn't have, I mean, she moved out to the Bay Area. And so her support system, I mean, I think is primarily our family that lives out there. So it's nice that I can connect with her in that way. So I did appreciate that. But I don't know, but I guess I would say I enjoyed that. You know what I mean? Because that was nice. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Were there any challenges that you encountered along the way?
Yeah, I mean, the initial challenge was like, how do you write a memoir? Because I'd never done anything like this before. And for me, I always felt like, well, if I don't remember it, I can't put it in, right? Like you have to be very literal about everything you remember. Even to the point of like saying, I'm not going to write any lines or dialogue. But then, I started reading all these memoirs and everybody else included scenes and dialogue. And then, people said, no, you have to do that. But as long as the scenes and the words capture the essence of what's going on, it's okay. So that's why they call it creative nonfiction and just not just nonfiction. And so once I got over that hoop of like saying like, okay, you know what I mean? As long as I'm true to the essence of that moment, you know what I mean? Like if I don't exactly remember exactly what was said, that's okay. And so once I gave myself that freedom, it became a lot easier. So
Got it. And then Dee Wong has the comment or question. I haven't read the book, so my question is a bit superficial. Could you say more about your structure and organization, chapter headings, etc.? Was all that obvious from the start, or did you struggle to come up with that?
So to start the process, I basically sent myself an email with the header. Everything I learned at Chung's. You know what I mean? And then I rattled off like 30 things that stories I was going to write about. At first, I actually thought it was just going to be like a Chinese, like a menu, like, little anecdotes. Some would be long, some would be short, et cetera, et cetera. It was more like a potpourri. But then when some of my early readers were like saying, "Oh, you need more structure to this," I thought like, okay, well, I can give up the idea of like having short and long pieces, right? And maybe I could just have a more formal thing. And that's when I thought like, okay, why don't I do 888, and then break it down into yeah, I can still keep the menu idea with the chapter headings, but the idea of having the 8 stories in each that came a little bit because that helped the readers a little bit more. But yeah, okay, yeah, structure, organization. Yeah, and so there's 24 stories in this book, but there's about 20 stories that didn't make it in. And I jokingly said to my agent, if this book does really well, we can sell a second book called Leftovers. So it's all the book stories that didn't make it in.
I will happily follow up and purchase a copy of Leftovers.
Yeah.
There is also a comment from Harmony who says, she's not sure whether her first comment went through, so want to make sure that I lifted it up here. And she wants everyone to know that you actually read the audiobook version yourself, and she really loved that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I actually wrote an article for LitHub, which is a publication about that whole process. Because as a kid that grew up self-conscious of my speaking, because and this is a story in the book, is that, even though my family's been here and we speak English to everybody, I was sent to English lessons because they thought, I needed them. And then also being a gay kid, you're always worried about like having a lisp and stuff like that or sounding gay. So the idea of how I talk and things like that is always, you know, um, I don't know, it's something I've been conscious of. So when I was asked to do it, I was like, oh my God, can I do this or not? But Yeah, I jokingly, I mean, yeah. So they flew me out to New York and did it, and they had a really good director, and so I think it went well. And Apple Books actually named it one of the top audiobooks for last year. I mean, for this year. So that was really kind of nice, kind of a surprise. So
Congratulations on that recognition, and it's amazing that to see the wonderful reception that this book has received. Because in this book getting acknowledged for the wonderful writing that you've done, you're also helping to lift up the experiences of so many of us in the community who wouldn't be able to write a book or to share our experiences. And thank you for the work that you've done with that.
sure, yeah, no, I mean it's my pleasure, and yeah, I'm just overwhelmed by all the response I've been getting on it. So that's what makes it a joy. I mean, I think so.
So if there are any additional questions for Curtis, this is your last opportunity to get them into the chat box there. While we're waiting, I did want to share one of my favorite excerpts from the book or moments from the book, if that's all right, Curtis. And again, that's kind of goes back to some of the shared experiences and journeys that you and I have had as gay Asians growing up in the Midwest. And so there's a part of your book where you recall going to a pet store and you say, my feet shuffled past the counter over and over each time. I pretended to check out uh, the canisters of Tetra Thin fish food on the bookshelf. On my fifth pass, I caught the title International Mail. I thought, cool, a publication for guys like me who yearn to travel. When I read that passage, I chuckled out loud just because it brought back a lot of memories. I don't know if I necessarily thought International Mail was a travel magazine, but it's definitely a publication very familiar with.
Yeah, there's a lot of 80s reference in the book. So that's another thing is if, there's so many different ways to categorize. This is what I've discovered. There's so many different ways to categorize the book. It isn't just about an Asian American family. It isn't just a coming out story, but it really is a story about Detroit. That's a big part of the book, but it's also a story about the 80s, right? I mean, there's so many pop references, in the book, not just the music, the politics of the time, the TV shows. I've had so many people who are from my generation who will be like, "Oh my God, you totally brought me back to my childhood." And so that was one of the fun parts about it too, is just reliving those things and just like, "Oh yeah, I remember that," because I had to really think back on like, what were the cultural things going on around that time. So,
Wonderful. An ode to the 80s. So, Curtis, our last question for you is where can people purchase your book?
Well, it's sold everywhere. Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Green Apple Books. If you guys are all in San Francisco, independent bookstores. Um, you know, it'd be great if you guys could support it, buy some as stocking stuffers. But also, I am touring around. I did 50 reading tours before the book came out, and I've done another 50 since October 17th. And I think I have another 50 planned for this spring. But, if there are other places that want to invite me to come do a talk, please let me know. If you're part of a employee resource group, invite me to do a talk for your club, or your book club or your school campus, because, I really just want to get the book out there. So if you guys can help me with that, I'd really appreciate that.
So, task action request put out into the world. I hope that everyone follows up on that. We did have just one more comment that just came in. Hi, Curtis. I'm a Wolverine too. Think we were in the same class of 92 in the Asian American Network. Your name is so familiar. Congrats, Bessie Lee.
Thank you, Bessie.
So, Curtis, just wanted to say thank you again for how in this book you've helped to lift up the experiences of gays, of Asian immigrants, of people living in the Midwest, the working families, restaurant owners, and really provide an opportunity for those of us who share similar identities to have that sense of feeling seen and feeling heard and feeling like our lives are meaningful. And for those who don't have those identities or have those experiences, it's an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity to develop a little bit of understanding and hopefully a lot more empathy. So thank you so much for your work on this book and for joining us tonight.
Sure. And if you want to check out my schedule, please go to curtisfromdetroit.com. That's where you'll see my whole schedule, at least the dates that I have up already. You can also email me there if you want to follow up with me. So yeah, again, thank you for this opportunity. I really, really appreciate it. So
Thank you, Curtis. And as we wrap up tonight's program, I will just put on screen here another request, and that is for everyone to take a moment to fill out your feedback survey, which we will be sending to you via email shortly after this program concludes. And just as extra incentive, every quarter we'll be doing a drawing of all the completed feedback surveys that we receive for a $50 gift card from our new Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation gift store, which is located in the Angel Island Immigration Museum that opened up last year in the site's former hospital building. If you enjoyed tonight's free program, please continue to consider making a donation to the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation at www.aiisf.org/donate. We're currently right in the middle of our end of year giving campaign. And if you've already made a contribution this year, perhaps there's an opportunity to make a contribution in memory of or in honor of someone who is part of your friend group, of your family group. We do have a number of thank you gifts for our donors who contribute to our end of year campaign at the $40 level. If you make a donation of $40, we will enter you into a raffle for a gift certificate to our gift store. For those of you who contribute at the $400 level or higher, we will provide tickets to a tour of Angel Island guided by our staff. And that ticket will include ferry service, ground shuttle service, as well as a hot lunch. And then finally, if you are helping to support us at the $4,000 level, we will help to coordinate a private VIP tour for you and 9 of your friends or family, also including ferry, shuttle, and lunch. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for your continued support of Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation. And please follow us on our social media so that you can stay tuned and apprised of all of our upcoming events that we have coming up in 2024. So have a wonderful, happy holidays, and we will see you hopefully in 2024 in the new year. Cheers, everyone.